To you, the saints, good day to you. This sermon recap is for Lent 1, the year C, the year of Luke, preached at University Lutheran on February 17th, 2013. Again, if these sermon recaps are helpful for you, that if you wouldn't maybe think about subscribing to my YouTube channel or liking them there at YouTube, that's an important thing for you to do for me. Luke, Lent, the first Sunday in Lent, the Sunday that follows Ash Wednesday in Luke, we get the temptation story of Jesus, and so let's get that in front of us. Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan and was led by the Spirit in the wilderness, where for 40 days he was tempted by the devil. Jesus ate nothing at all during those days, and when they were over, he was famished. The devil said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command this stone to become a loaf of bread." Jesus answered, "It is written, one does not live by bread alone." Then the devil led Jesus up and showed him in an instant all the kingdoms of the world. And the devil said to him, "To you I will give their glory and all this authority, for it has been given over to me, and I give it to anyone I please. If you then will worship me, it will all be yours." Jesus answered him, "Worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Then the devil took him to Jerusalem and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down from here, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you to protect you, and on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not dash your foot against a stone." Jesus answered him, "It is said, do not put the Lord your God to the test." When the devil had finished every test, he departed from Jesus until an opportune time. A really simple sermon because I wanted to do something actually different. Our worship had a different focus yesterday, and again, thanks to all our musicians and the cantor, to the folks who work so hard to put worship together every week. It was a wonderful morning of worship. One commentator wondered if this temptation story, if we're to take this story seriously, why is Jesus tempted? What is Jesus tempted to do in these 40 days? And again, 40 days, the 40 days of Lent, the 40 days of Moses getting the law, the 40 days, the 40 years of wandering of the Israelites, the 40 days and nights of the flood, 40 always meaning completely done in, completely finished, completely full. So Jesus is altogether famished in this. And we have 40 days to move from Ash Wednesday to Easter Sunday morning plus Sunday mornings to do our thing in Lent. If Jesus is tempted, what is Jesus tempted? And the commentator said in one sentence that Jesus is tempted as Son of God to usurp God from God's place, as God from God's throne. That Luke builds this tension that right before the temptation story, we get the genealogy, the lineage in Luke, and it ends by saying, "Here is Jesus, son of Joseph." The very next story in Luke, which we've had a couple weeks ago, is Jesus teaching and preaching in his home synagogue in Nazareth. And the people wonder, isn't this Joseph's son? So that you get Joseph's son before and after, and then in the middle the devil says, "If you are the Son of God." And so there is this temptation that is common from Adam and Eve to Moses, to Elijah, to Elisha, to Daniel, to David, seemingly to Jesus, to you and I, that there is this common thread in sin that we wish to usurp God, to say to God, "You're sitting in my chair." And one way to deal with that is Ash Wednesday. One way to deal with that is Lent. That Ash Wednesday begins by a smudge of ash across your forehead. And so yesterday I passed around some ashes that folks could smudge the back of their hands if they wished. Because one of the sayings, one of the liturgies of Ash Wednesday is to say that remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return. There is this sobering effect. There is this realistic knowledge that we die and that we are not God, that we have no business thinking that we should usurp God from God's place in life, in creation, in glory. And so for Jesus, with bread and rock and with temple and angels, with kingdoms and their glory, the temptation is to say to God that you're sitting in my place, and Jesus, of course, wasn't willing to do that. And so then I simply talked about getting to the end of ourselves with this smudge of ash on our hand allows us then to pray and to fast and to give alms in a different way. A couple weeks ago, well, let me back up. last week, now that I'm 50, and now that I'm married again, and now that, in fact, more specifically, I'm married to a physician, that last week I began my 50-year-old series of physicals. And this medical physical obviously will have things that will follow up with that. But in doing so, I had a physical on Thursday, and so to begin the sermon, I passed out a series of driver's licenses of mine and had the folks look at where the state it was given from, when it was given to me, when it was made, and to look at my height and weight. And so here is a driver's license from 1994 from Nebraska. Look at that handsome guy. 5'11", 175. Here is a driver's license from Minnesota, issued date in 2000. Issued in Minnesota. Look at that handsome fella. Right there you'll see 5'11", 175. My first Wisconsin. Look at that. Looks like some kind of angry fellow. And here's my current driver's license. 5'11", 175. 5'11", 175, 5'11", 175, 5'11", 175. Every driver's license I think that I've ever owned, ever been issued, 5'11", brown eyes, brown hair, 175. But with my physical last week, for the second time in my life, I was measured at 5'10". In fact, I asked the lady to check it twice because for most of my life, 5'11", 5'11", 5'11", not 175, but who's counting? That there is this realization in being 50 and being 5'10" when I've always been 5'11", that I'm coming to the end of myself. And so a couple weeks ago I heard a sermon at Luther Seminary by Rolf Jacobson, and he quoted George MacDonald, a preacher, a sermon from 1889, a quote, "For the one principle of hell is this, I am my own. I am my own king and my own subject. I am the center from which goes out my thoughts. I am the object and the end of my thoughts. Back upon me as the alpha and the omega of my life, my thoughts return. My own glory is, and ought to be, my chief care. My ambition to gather the regards of men to the one center, myself. My pleasure is my pleasure. To do my own will so long as I feel anything to be my will is to be free, is to live. To all these principles of hell or of this world, they are the same thing, and it matters nothing whether they are asserted or defended so long as they are acted upon. The Lord, the King, gives the direct lie." So it's not a new reality that one aspect, one denominator of hell is that we are our own end, because in the end we run out of ourselves. And so Lent as a season brings us by ash, remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return. It brings us to the end of ourselves. That is really 5'10". And once we realize that we are not here to usurp God, that we are not here to be some hero of faith, that we are not here to be some mini Christ in that sense, then that allows us to pray and allows us to fast and it allows us to give alms, to be more charitable in a different way. One last story. I've heard of a person, I don't know this person, hospitalized last week, 78, a woman, widowed, so proud of her life that she doesn't have running water, that she pumps her own water, that she walks to town every day, over 1.5 miles to town, and yet now in certain medical realities is found to be hospitalized, and as they've gone to check on the condition of her home, that they've needed to tell her that her home is condemned, that it is not safe for her to return to, and that she'll never return to her own home. And it just so broke my heart to hear the story. Not that we shouldn't care for people and watch out for people, because we should, but that the pride of her whole life, the pride that she took in the way that she lived as being a good thing all these 78 or 79 years, has now been deemed condemned. And that she is me, and we are her. That there is a sense that we build up these lives and we prop them up, and that's okay. But in the end, we come up short, that we come up 5'10" instead of 5'11", and we are smudged with ashes for the sake of not despair, but for the sake of hope. That we are smudged with ashes. Remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return, not for despair, but for life and resurrection. That we are smudged with ashes. That remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return, so that getting to the end of ourselves, we can pray. We can pray for one another. And so I had the folks during worship, during the sermon, call out people that they would like to be prayed for, and having somebody else in the congregation raise their hand and say, I'll pray for them. At the end of myself, this isn't about me. I don't even know this person. I get nothing out of this prayer for that person except to pray. At the end of myself, at the end of whatever I thought was glory, at the end of whatever I thought was faith, at the end of whatever I thought was Lent, at the end of whatever I thought was a kingdom, stones to bread. I pray and I fast, and I can be a bit more generous at the end of myself. To you in these holy, blessed days of Lent, grace and peace, be well in all things.